All right, welcome to another edition of Hey Bobby. I'm Ray Horner, and with us, Senior VP of the Cleveland Guardians, Bobby DiBiasio, here on 93.5, 1590 WAKR, Facebook page, YouTube channel, and WAKR.net. And Bobby donates his time with us. Bobby, and we're seeing more young pitching coming up. We're seeing the Hunter Gattises come through for us, and Herons coming through for us. And maybe it's time again as we look into the organization's commitment, because this doesn't happen by accident. The teaching and the working with these pitchers, they just seem to come in waves with the pitchers from the organization. And I remember Mr. Dolan years ago when they purchased the team, stood up in front of us here in Akron. He said, we're going to build this franchise on pitching and defense. And my goodness, they have with the Dolan ownership. And why don't you go down the road here and talk about the team's commitment, the organization's commitment to pitching?
Ray, that comment's coming from an old high school catcher. Mr. Dolan, Larry Dolan, was a catcher at St. Ignatius High School. Also a running back and a cornerback on the football team. Played in the famous charity game that happened at Cleveland Stadium, the high school's East Senate, West Senate games back in the 40s and 50s. Every kid in Cleveland wished to play football on the Cleveland Stadium field, and baseball, of course. Our commitment to pitching philosophically came from Mr. Dolan's love of that aspect of the game, that you cannot have enough pitching, that pitching is the most important aspect of the success of a baseball team. And if you are built on pitching, you better catch the ball. And so you build yourself on pitching and a good solid defense. Then you take it to Chris Antonetti, Mike Chernoff, and the group running our baseball operations. And while pitching had always been a focal point, all of a sudden the game changed, Ray, and you have these pitchers signing for 7 years at 25, 30 million a year. And free agent pitching just got so incredibly expensive, and probably for the most part inefficient, because people get hurt and they just can't perform over the course of 6-7 years at that high of a salary. The major markets can chalk it up to, we made a little bit of a mistake, we'll go buy somebody else. But the rest of us, all the middle market teams, we can't live in that world. So the whole focus of, okay, how do we go about creating the best pitching factory we absolutely can? You talk to Ben Lively and Scott Barlow. I mean, they'll tell you in their interviews. Rosie had one with Scott Barlow the other day in the pregame show where he said, my goodness, what Carl Willis and those guys have done for me in the short period I've been here. We all hear it around the league that this is a pitching factory, and now I'm learning why. And it's interesting that he said they allowed me to come to spring training and pitch. They didn't immediately say, we saw video of you in the off season, so work on this. They said, go pitch. And then after you get into the flow of things, we'll sit back and start to tweak your mechanics or see how we can help you add some distance on your breaking ball or things of that nature. He said it's just been not only from Carl Willis, but everybody involved, the analytics guys, the video crew. So when you make that kind of statement that you're committed to pitching, you better be all in, and we are.
Carl Willis, pitching coach, and is he one of the most underrated guys, you think, in the organization, Bobby? Because we talk about the young kids coming up, and obviously our new manager's done a nice job. Carl Willis just continues to tinker and work with these guys and throw great pitchers out there on the mound almost every inning.
And the people that work around him are all off to bigger, better jobs around the league. Ruben Niebla, was at AAA as part of Carl's staff, and then he becomes the Padres pitching coach. And there's, Brian Sweeney, who's now the pitching coach at Kansas City. I mean, they're dotted around the league. Well, that coaches are mostly underrated anyway. They only get noticed when people think they're doing a bad job, not when the team's rolling well.
I agree. Speaking of coaches, that's where I wanted to go to next during this week's visit. Sandy Alomar. He's our first base coach. He's our catcher's coach, but he's even more than that to the organization. And you've seen him since day one come up through. And Bobby, I thought we could spend a couple of minutes talking about Sandy's importance with the Cleveland franchise, from baseball, from player to coach, and everything he means to us.
You're right. I've been involved with Sandy from the moment um, he came to us. It was a winter meetings trade by Hank Peters in early December of 1989. Hank Peters gets hired by Dick Jacobs to be the president of this baseball team, and not only on the business side, but certainly on the baseball side. Hank had been the farm director for the Cleveland Indians back in the 60s. And so he was familiar with our franchise. And he's truly the architect of why we, once we moved into Jacobs Field, Progressive Field, that we've had the sustained winning culture. Hank's the guy that was the architect of all that. And he made this trade, Baerga, Chris James, Sandy Alomar for Joe Carter, winter meetings of 1989. And, Sandy bursts onto the scene as a Gold Glover, Rookie of the Year in 1990. 20 years, think about it, 20 years as a catcher in the big leagues, a six-time All-Star for us, spent 11 years with us, 5 division titles, 2 American League pennants. He was the leader of those teams, and now in his 15th season as a coach, I know one thing, that he desperately wants to win a World Series wearing a Cleveland uniform.
I love that. And, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know him a lot better than obviously I do, Bobby. He's had a lot of feelers pertaining to managerial positions, but it seems like he is very comfortable at his home with us, with Cleveland, coaching, maturing, and like you said, ultimate goal is to win a World Series in a Cleveland uniform. But he loves this organization, right?
Yeah, he does. When Tito chose to step down, everybody thought, wow, here's a chance for Sandy. And Sandy just 11 years ago, he interviewed for the job after Maniac, and it ended up being between him and Tito. And even he was like, hey, you got a chance to grab Tito, you better grab him, and I'll be on his staff. And then I'll see what's out there for me. And the more he thought about what's out there for him, especially 11 years later, managing, just wasn't in his DNA anymore. He's very happy with the impact he makes on this organization, what he means to this organization. And so, as I mentioned, and you mentioned, his goal is to win a World Series in a Cleveland uniform. And I think he's just put the managerial aspirations aside, that now in his life, he's 57 years old, believe it or not, that just That's just not something that it drives him. I think in any walk of life, any business that you're in, all you really want is to have input, impact, and he certainly has that at our organization.
Senior VP with the Cleveland Guardians, Bob DiBiasio with us. We call it Hey Bobby. Available for you each week with us here at the Rubber City Radio Group, our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, WAKR.net, and right here on the Ray Warner Morning Show. Bobby, as always, my friend, thanks for joining us again this week, and we will do it again next week.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Ray. Go Guardians.